Thank you all for being here. We're talking about some legislative proposals for fostering transparency. I appreciate the witnesses and your flexibility. I think we've had to reschedule this hearing, and then based on the schedule of the day, we bumped this back to 10:30 this morning. So I appreciate your patience and understanding as there's some big legislative things that are happening on the floor. Again, we appreciate the expertise that you bring here. We're here because this committee is probably, as much as anybody, wants to do everything it can to foster transparency, and it's critical to carrying out our committee's mission. As those of us that have the privilege of serving in Congress, we have an obligation to ensure the American people know how their money is spent and how their government functions. In all the undertakings, we seek to shed light on issues, share information that matters to the taxpayer, and advance legislative solutions where necessary. We're not only the Oversight Committee, but we're also the Committee on Government Reform. And so with the reform in mind, we'll examine 3 legislative proposals and shine light as they illuminate the light here and here as well. 3 legislative proposals which strive to improve the way taxpayers access information. One bill is called the Audit the Fed, referring to the Federal Reserve. A bill that I have championed, the Fannie and Freddie Open Records Act of 2017. Fannie and Freddie have obligations that the American taxpayers have that are literally a staggering amount of number, in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And the Open the Government Data Act. Last Congress, we passed bipartisan Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA legislation. It was signed into law and marked a big step forward in reforming the process, but it didn't solve all the problems. There's still some that face us moving forward. And I hope we can advance more bipartisan transparency legislation in this Congress. Audit the Fed, sponsored by Mr. Massey of Kentucky, provides insight into the practices of the Federal Reserve while continuing to support its independence and instrument of monetary policy. The Open Government Data Act, sponsored by Mr. Farenthold of Texas, requires federal agencies to publish data in an open, machine-readable format on data.gov. And the Fannie and Freddie Open Records Act of 2017 applies the Freedom of Information Act to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, so taxpayers have critical information they need while these 2 entities are in conservatorship. Members of the committee may raise additional pieces of transparency legislation in the hearing today, but I think all these 3 pieces of transparency legislation exemplify the fundamental right of the American people to know what their government is doing and what sort of obligations are in place. And with that, I'd like to actually yield time to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, who is the chief sponsor of one of these pieces of legislation. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.